Hello, I'm Ron Deckenhart, and welcome to the Santa Fe Distinguished Lecture Series. Today we have the pleasure of Professor Ilan Stavans visiting us and in the webinar format from Amherst College. Professor Stavans is an esteemed colleague and friend from a long time past. And one of the people that I have to mention to you that is one of those unique individuals who grew up in Latin America speaking Spanish and Yiddish, and then is a Hebrew speaker, and I'm not sure how many other languages. His 50 plus books have been translated into 20 languages, a National Jewish Book Award winner, Guggenheim Fellow, and the awards go on. It's such a pleasure that he can be with us today. Dr. Bonnie Ellinger, who is formerly of the faculty of Bar Ilan University, is with us and will participate in the questioning when we get to the end of the talk. And it's a real pleasure for us to have this event today on Jewish literature. Professor Stavans, it is a real pleasure to be here with you today. Welcome to the Santa Fe Distinguished Lecture Series.
Thank you, Ron, very much. Thank you, Bonnie, too, for being present here. It is a pleasure, and I want first to start by acknowledging Gloria's support for this particular lecture for mine. She and I have collaborated for years in a variety of projects. I admire her art, and the fact that she is from Colombia and I am from Mexico creates a special bonding. I am also in awe by the fact that this is in connection with the Institute of Tolerance Studies. Tolerance is a word that seems to be quite difficult to tackle these days and difficult to stand for, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world, including among Jews in Israel. And maybe it is with the meaning and the impact of a word that I can start. My goal is to spend with all of you friends the next day, as Ron said, 30, 35 minutes, talking about what makes Jewish literature Jewish, and do so in a variety of ways by leading us through a kind of a journey across time and space to understand the idiosyncrasies, the challenges, the metabolism of Jewish literature, if one could say that there is such a thing. And I put this as a big question mark because it will be part of my constant reflection with you. That word where I want to start is the word character. The character is a word that is not often brought in anymore into the classroom. It used to be at the center of academic debate, and yet it's very much in the media all the time. Someone's character, what is it that defines them? What is it that defines Donald Trump, or what is it that defines Joe Biden? Maybe the way to pin down the word character is to say that it is the traits or the aspects of an individual that define that person in such ways that we learn to expect certain responses, certain ways of tackling the world because of the exposure or the training that we have had toward them. We can also, of course, use the word character in a demeaning or humorous way. Oh, what a character that person is, meaning they are beyond what we consider normal or standard. They come close to a certain paradigm that we see on Hollywood or on television, and the elements, the profile of the responses, the traits of that individual seem to us to be perhaps a little more extreme, even cartoonish than other people. We would not use the word character, what a character, in that humorous type of way. I would like to bring the word character to connect it with nations or with cultures or with groups. Is it possible to say, as has been said many times throughout history, but maybe we're more reluctant to engage that word right now, that nations have a character too, that the French act in particular ways vis-a-vis the Germans or the Italians or the Portuguese or the Spanish or the British? And if so, what is the trait that defines the British character or the German character or the Ukrainian character? Can we apply the same elements that we apply to an individual to describe a country? And if so, how does the character of a country or a nation or a group evolve to be distinguished vis-a-vis others? And that vis-a-vis is certainly crucial. We define an individual's character in contrast with the rest of the individuals that we're exposed to. In other words, in comparative ways. And we do the same thing when it comes to nations. We say the Germans are A, B, and C, in a way that the French are not, or the Spanish are not, or the Portuguese are not. These are characteristics that define them. Imagine for a second that you wanted to create a new nation, a new country. What is it that you would need? And in what way would the character eventually be formed to define that nation in contrast with many others? You would need, of course, maybe a territory, although we're talking about Jewish literature today, and a territory was not present for over 2,000 years. And I might even push you to think that Israeli literature is and isn't full part of Jewish literature, that it has traits or characteristics, the Israeli character, that make it unique even within the context of the tradition of Jewish literature. Aside from a territory, a flag, a currency, a national bank connected with the currency, a sense of history and mythology, you can't really put together a new nation if you don't have a group of people that are convinced that they have something special that defines them, that is unlike those neighbors that are around them, and that they can come together to establish this sense of being different. But of course, you also need a language. And it is through the language often that I look at the prism of nationality, of citizenship, just because I have always been, from the very beginning, fascinated with the way that words represent us, where those words come from. How is it that a language comes together? At what point in the development of such a language does the standardizing come to the fore? I am very interested in the arrival of dictionaries, modern dictionaries, in the development of a linguistic tradition. And if you wanted to create a nation, a new nation, aside from the various traits that I've been telling you, of course, you would need people, you would need a language that unifies them or that brings them together. But yet again, this is another challenge, because we're talking about Jewish literature today, and probably, at least in my perspective, what defines Jewish literature is the fact that it has been aterritorial for at least 2,000 years, as I mentioned, and it has been multilingual as well, and that remains to the very present. Whereas, and here is the core of my argument, dear friends, whereas the Germans produce a literature that becomes a representation of their character, where you can see the traits of the psychology, the dreams, the dark side of the German people through the literature that they represent, that they engage in and they produce. That literature is written almost exclusively in German, the way that the French write literature in French and the Mexicans write literature in Spanish, or the Colombians or the Argentines, etc. Of course, we are in the 21st century, and especially in the 20th century, the big influence of immigration redefined the way we look at literatures, internal literatures, and the voices of those that come from abroad remain, at least from the very beginning, an essential element in the shaping of this nation, although most nations have the view that in order to become successful, in order to be healthy, immigrants or the children of immigrants or the descendant of immigrants in one way or another after 2-3 generations will ultimately be writing, if they join the quest of, say, the American literary tradition, in English and not in German or in Danish or in Chinese or in Spanish or in Yiddish. American literature is in English, again, with some very important exceptions, but for the most part, it is codified in that language, and so is the other literatures that I have mentioned. I am interested in Jewish literature because I myself, as Ron mentioned, come from a Jewish background. I was born and raised in Mexico City, bilingual, grandchild of Eastern European, Yiddish-speaking Jews, and thus had two languages, Spanish and Yiddish, and maybe as a result, two loyalties. Because without flag, without post office, I didn't mention, without bank, without territory, and without language, there is ultimately a sense of belonging and a sense of loyalty or partnership. And when you grow up with two languages, you are, or you get the impression that you are both an insider in the larger game that is to be Mexican. I spoke Spanish with my neighbors, going to watch soccer games in the Azteca and other stadiums, on television, listening to music. And then there was, I would say, in contrast with the public language, the national language, there was the private language, the domestic language, the intimate language, and that was Yiddish, the language of the grandparents and parents and siblings, and the language of French, and the language of instructions in my case, as I went to the Yiddish Schule in Mexico, and Yiddish was the language of instruction. This duality, this sense of a divided heart, a sense that you are in and that you are out, makes you also at some point maybe come close to the conviction that you are neither here nor there, and that as a member of a minority, you are joining the joys of being part of a larger conversation, but there is something that sets you apart, that makes you distinct, and that creates a feeling that you are part of an alternative nation, that you're an outsider, that you look at things from a different perspective. But as things go on, it often happens with many of us Jews in the diaspora that that feeling of a multiplied sense of linguistic self sets you in motion to feel that you belong to a diasporic quest that goes beyond time and beyond space, and that infuses you with a feeling of belonging that is beyond the present tense. And that's really an essential component. My own journey took me after Yiddish, and I should say that when I was growing up, a Yiddish speaker in Mexico, I would have very ambivalent feelings towards Spanish, toward Yiddish. I would feel that my parents were putting me in a shule, in a school where I was being taught a language that didn't have no longer had a place in the world, that it was a language of nostalgia, a language of the past, a language that connected with the destruction of part of my family and the destruction of an entire civilization. I was born in 1961, just about 15 years before. And that as a result, there was something absolutely unpractical in that design of the education that I was getting. Why not teach me English? I would be able to get better jobs, or French or German, or any language that would allow me to be more mobile, or have a stake in the present tense. Sometimes the languages that we teach or that we learn are languages that create an artificial sense of inserting us in a reality that is not quite from where we are. It was only later, when I rebelled against my parents and against my culture, I left Mexico and traveled the world. And ultimately, after a long wandering and wondering, settled in New York City, that I discovered that Yiddish had much more of a role to play in my Weltanschauung, in my worldview. And that it wasn't only the language that I had learned, but I had learned a worldview through Yiddish, a prism to understand the world entire from a variety of perspectives. What distinguishes Jewish literature, and I'm here, dear friends, talking about modern Jewish literature, by which I mean the literature, roughly, we can argue when modernity starts for the world, and when modernity starts for the Jews. These do not necessarily have to be coinciding points. I am going to suggest, just for the purposes of this discussion, that for us Jews, modernity starts not with the Haskalah, with the Enlightenment, that is Moses Mendelssohn, and the departure of the Jews from the self-enclosed environments where they lived into civil society in Germany first, and then in France and elsewhere, the connection with the larger ideas of the Enlightenment of the French encyclopedists and others. But that for us, it starts in 1492 with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Jews had been expelled from other European countries before, and would be expelled from others as well. Sometimes those were city-states in Italy and in France. And yet 1492 seems to mark a dramatic and essential moment in the shaping of Jewish history, and irrigates the population that lived during La Convivencia, the coexistence of the three major Abrahamic religions in the Iberian Peninsula, and mostly talking about Spain, but Portugal as well, throughout the Mediterranean, Northern Africa, Italy, the Balkans, as far as Amsterdam and England. And of course, with 1492 being also the moment in which Columbus, this kind of disoriented Italian sailor, got funds, and across the Americas by that irrigation, by bringing many conversos, crypto-Jews, and new Christians into the so-called New World, particularly in the two major centers around Mexico City and in Lima, where the Inquisition eventually also transferred itself. I am passionate about ancient or the Jewish literature of antiquity, the biblical literature, the Talmud, the Gemara, the Mishnah, the literature of rabbinical responsa, and the literature of the incipient emergence of Kabbalah in Spain and in France. But for the purposes, again, of this discussion, I'm focusing on modern Jewish literature, post 1492. Whereas other groups, other national groups have stuck, and stuck here is a word that is both positive and negative, into a single language. We have been dispersed into a variety of languages worldwide. Just the Jews that left from Spain into these different diasporas that I was mentioning, as marranos and crypto Jews and whatever term we're going to be using to define that population. There was Hebrew, and there was Arabic, and there was Spanish, and of course there was Judaismo, or Judeo-Spanish, or Ladino, meaning that that population was polyglottic at its heart, in that it knew how to negotiate its existence from a variety of ways in order to survive and in order to thrive. And if you look at the literature of the Spanish expulsion and of the Spanish diaspora, it is written Sephardic literature and connected with Mizrahi and Ashkenazi literature as a literature that pullulates, jumps from one language to another. There are the conversos that write in Spanish. There are those that took Ladino and wrote in different parts of the Balkans, and Ladino would become a leitmotif. Sometimes not an active leitmotif, not a language itself, but a kind of a prism, as Yiddish was for me in other parts of the world. But also in the 19th century, the switching from in major centers of France, in the colonies, in the Balkans, from Ladino into the spelling and use of French as a way for the Sephardic communities to communicate with one another. Think of the Jews, as I do just for a second, as a machine of language production. It is said that there have been approximately 30,000 languages created by people in the history of humankind. I don't know if there is another group that has produced itself as many languages as Jews have. We are proficient in the language of the larger society. English, in this case, is the language that I'm communicating with you. And of course, we could say that English is a Jewish language because Jews communicate in English right now. But English is the language that we have come to, we have adopted, and we're engaging in. I'm talking specifically about Jewish languages, meaning intra-languages or minority languages. And I already mentioned Ladino, probably the second most important of all Jewish languages. I'm excluding here Hebrew. Hebrew is the biblical language and the language that kind of runs through our history, and the language that it's our root and brings us always back to the core. Ladino is a language that enabled the Sephardic civilization to thrive. Compared to other languages, it has been vigorous, and it has mainly produced a gorgeously diverse folklore, poetry, and to some degree also fiction and nonfiction, but to a limited degree. There have been other Jewish languages like Judo-Italian, Judo-Portuguese, Judo-Persian, or Judo-French. They have never developed the way Ladino developed because of numbers, that is demographics, because of that crucial breaking of the Spanish diaspora that irrigated all these different points that I was mentioning. But yet arguably the most important in terms of production, in terms of continuity, language ever produced by Jews, internal language, minority language, and again, I am here talking about its capacity to produce literary artifacts, is Yiddish. Yiddish is the longest language in terms of health that Jews have produced, with the exception of Hebrew. It is a language that literally became the companion of modernity. It is older than when Shakespeare was writing Yiddish. Shakespeare was writing his plays, there was already Yiddish. When Chaucer was writing the Canterbury Tales, there was already Yiddish. When there was an early English, there was an early Yiddish too. Yiddish has gone from a variety of stages: early, middle, modern Yiddish, and it has also traveled the world in dramatic ways. It is the language that has produced the most literature for Jews as an internal language, even including Hebrew in this case. And it has splintered into a variety of dialects, depending on how you describe dialect. Within Yiddish, there is the Galicianer Yiddish and the Litvak Yiddish, that is Yiddishes that were defined by the particular context where a group existed. And then there is the Yiddish that mutated when the Jews immigrated, say from 1880 to 1930 to the United States, in something that evolved called Yinglish, the mixing of Yiddish and English, that produced really fascinating music, novels, short stories, poetry, a kind of anglicized Yiddish. Jewish literature is multilingual. Jewish literature is decentralized. It exists in a number of different countries. There is something in the character of Jewish literature that makes a writer like Kafka, writing in German in what is today Czechoslovakia, feel empathetic and connected with a writer like Bruno Schulz that writes in Polish in Poland, or Isaac Babel that writes in Russian during the Soviet Union. And all of these three could also be put together with Sholem Aleichem and Mendele and Yitzchak Leibowitz Peretz, the three great founding writers of Yiddish literature at the end of in the second half of the 19th century, and with one exception, the beginning of the 20th century. In other words, Jewish writers can write in an intra-language that is defined as a language that allows other Jews to communicate with each other, but not the larger Gentile environment, unless that literature is translated. Say, Tevye der Milchiker, Tevye the dairyman, from Yiddish into French or into German or into English. If it stays in Yiddish, it is only for the population that is reading and communicating in Yiddish. And that literature feels also very connected with figures like Bernard Malamud or Sol Bello or Cynthia Ozick or Grace Paley or Henry and Philip Roth, all of them English language writers, American writers, some more influenced than others by Yiddish, say Henry Roth, who wrote Call It Sleep, and yet writing in a way that feels both fully American and fully Jewish at the same time. What makes a Jewish book Jewish? I would say there are three possible answers here. One is that the author is Jewish, and by being Jewish, the work automatically is Jewish. But there are works of art where the author didn't know that she or he was Jewish, or didn't want to emphasize her or his Jewishness. I would consider Proust part of Jewish literature. But is À la recherche du temps perdu, In Search of Lost Time, a Jewish book in the way that Call It Sleep is, or The Diary of Anne Frank is, or Night by Elie Wiesel? The second possible answer is that the content of the book is Jewish. So the book is Jewish, but not necessarily the author. Or maybe it has to be that the author of the book is Jewish and the content of the book is Jewish. But here we have cases like, I don't know, Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, which is about Shylock. It de facto talks about being a minority in Venice. If one considers Jewish literature, the literature that is about Jews would have to be included here, but it wasn't written by a Jew. And depending on how you look at Shakespeare, you could say, as many have said, that is one of the most anti-Semitic books ever produced. I happen to think that the character that Shakespeare likes the most in his play, The Merchant of Venice, and among the whole galaxy of characters that Shakespeare produced, which are in the hundreds, is Shylock. And he identifies with him as an outsider with a particular viewpoint and humanizes him. I believe that the character of Shylock, specifically in numerous moments of the play, in the soliloquies or in the monologues or in the dialogue, is actually rather Jewish in a wholesome way that is not destructive, but quite appealing and even engaging. There is another aspect of this Jewishness of the book that also poses a big question. Does a book need to be outright Jewish, meaning does it have to spell out that it's about a Jewish topic in order for it to be a Jewish book? Look, friends, in the entire work of Kafka, who I consider to be one of the greatest Jewish writers, modern Jewish writers of all time, the word Jew is never included. Ever in the Metamorphosis, the Trial, the Judgment, America. And yet, if you ask me, I can't think of a more Jewish book than the Metamorphosis and of a more Jewish character than this middle class cockroach or bug that is Gregor Samsa. In his diaries, in his journals, Kafka uses the word Jew regularly, but not in his oeuvre, in his fiction. That's very significant. I want to suggest to you that there is something beyond the actual outright content being Jewish. I think there's a Jewish sensibility that needs to be in a work of art, in a work of literature, in order to make that work Jewish. In other words, what makes Gregor Samsa's family a dilemma Jewish is the way they feel, the way they approach and taste the world. And that is the dose of Jewishness that appears in the book. I don't think it's an artificial Jewishness. It comes through the DNA that Kafka received from the moment of birth, in this tension that I'm talking to you between nature and nurture. We Jews are Jews not because of how much we pray or how often we talk about Middle Eastern topics, or if we believe or not believe in God. It's a kind of prism or sensibility. That brings me to the third option, which is one that could be much more polemical and less satisfying, but one that I keep on going back inevitably. Remember, the first one was that the author needed to be Jewish, but I put it in a question mark. The second is that the book needed to have Jewish content, but I put it on a question mark. The author might not know or might not want to be identified as a Jew, like the conversos and the crypto Jews, and yet is sending a kind of tacit message, voluntarily or not. And that the book might actually not want to use because of censorship or because of aesthetic intent, the word Jew or Jewish or any topic that connects with the Bible or connects with Talmud and the Gemara and whatever, and yet be outright Jewish. The third element to me is the reader. What makes a Jewish book Jewish is the person who is finishing the work that the author started. and that is someone who doesn't come naively and unintentionally to a work, but with a very clear sense that we all read in order to answer questions of existence. We love novels because we think that characters are like us, and because we think we are characters in this big, larger than life novel that is our own life and the life of the world. The novel, poetry, nonfiction, literature in general are a mirror through which we see ourselves reflected. And we are that mirror. We produce the image on that mirror. It is us. It is that changing face. It's a speaking mirror. It's a talking mirror. It's an oral mirror because we hear our voices, even when those voices are only on the page. Although, of course, today, the people of the book are the people of a variety of books. It can be the printed book, it can be the graphic novel, it can be the picture in children and the young adult book, and it can be the audio book. It can be Facebook. It can be all sorts of things that we have turned the book into. The reader here, I think, is as important a protagonist as the writer. There is no book that exists without somebody reading it. If I finish a masterpiece and put it in a drawer, it's kind of the paradigm of the tree that falls in the middle of the forest and nobody hears it. Does that masterpiece exist? No, it exists only when somebody finds it and somebody reads it, and thus when somebody reacts to it. And as a result, there is not one 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad. This is a shout out to Gloria, a wonderful novel from Colombia. But there are as many 100 Years of Solitude as the number of readers that have ever read that book. We all go and finish the task that Gabriel Garcia Marquez started by writing the saga of the Macondo, the town and the Buendía family. Muchos años después, frente al pelotón de fusilamiento, el coronel Aureliano Buendía había de recordar esa tarde remota en que su padre lo llevó a conocer el hielo. That beautiful first line that opens up a faucet of narrative in 100 Years of Solitude. The same thing is done by Jewish readers. And here is my key point, dear friends. Wherever you are, I think you'll identify with me. What makes Jewish books Jewish is that they are translated. The translators make them available worldwide. We have always been a translated culture. From the very beginning of the expulsion, from the very beginning of the destruction of the first temple, and then of the second temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, the fact that we live in habitats where our original language, Hebrew, and which others are there, are not spoken, means that we have to translate ourselves and translate others. One of the great beauties of Yiddish literature is that it not only produced astonishing works of art that culminated in 1978 with the Nobel Prize for Isaac Bashevis Singer, so far the only Yiddish writer to receive a Nobel Prize. But the fact that in Yiddish, there were lots of translators that were bringing works of different languages into Yiddish readers. And you can read today Dickens in Yiddish, Spinoza in Yiddish, Don Quixote in Yiddish, Dostoevsky in Yiddish. That is as much a feast of the literary imagination as the fact that the Peretz in Sholem Aleichem and Abramovich and all of the other Yiddish writers wrote in that language. So I think that one of the great characters in the tradition of Jewish literature are the translators that have made the works available. And of course, there is never an innocent translation. All translators, as the Italians say, are traitors. we're all traders because we are filtering the original text through our sensibility and bringing it to the target language. And by doing so, reconfigure it, renew it, reinvent it. The translators are those intermediaries that allow for different times to connect, for different spaces to connect, and for different societies in different historical moments to come together. Reading Jewish literature is reading, thanks to those translators, works that come to us in many different languages and bring us back to that question of sensibility. And here I'm wrapping things up, dear friends. Is there a Jewish sensibility when we talk about writers as diverse as somebody writing in French, Elie Wiesel, he also wrote in Yiddish, or somebody writing in Portuguese, like Moacir Scliar, in the great humorist of the second half of the 19th century, of the 20th century, or Agnon, or David Grossman, or Amos Oz. I believe that there is something that travels across languages, across habitats, that allows us to feel that empathy as readers. And I feel that what makes Jewish literature Jewish is that we have turned territory into a book. We have a portable library that travels with us from one place to another, enabling us to find our roots and to enhance that sensibility that in and of itself confirms that connection with the DNA that we have with others that can really be speaking, as we say in Spanish, in Chinese. When you say somebody's speaking in Chinese, it doesn't mean that they speak in Chinese. En español, cuando dices hablan en chino, it means that they speak in a language you have no idea how to decipher. That is what Jewish literature is about, the capacity of deciphering, the literature that feels very close to us and gives us a sense of belonging through a common language where that invisible entity, the translator, becomes our kind of hero. I will conclude by saying that it was the Arabs, to whom we were very close during La Convivencia, who called us the people of the book. That moniker has stuck. We are the people of the book. It's a big question. Will the people of the book survive another century or another millennia? And if they will, I have personally no doubt about it, will they remain the people of the book? Might we be abandoning storytelling in the form of literature for other more favored and easier to access forms of storytelling like Netflix or Hulu or graphic novels or comic strips, where Jews have also become quite distinguished? Is it still accurate to call us the people of the book? Might it be the peoples of the book because we speak these different languages? Or might we call ourselves the people of the books, the various books? In any event, I can tell you that we have always stuck and will continue to stick to the written word. Even when we sometimes feel that the younger generations feel somewhat alien and disengaged, unattached to it. It is ultimately that written word that feels like a contract with God, with ourselves, with our history, that gives us a sense of ownership and also of grounding. We travel with that portable library, and that portable library makes us feel full and wholesome, even when we don't access that portable library. Mark Twain said once, lucidly, that a classic is a book that everybody knows but nobody reads. And in many ways, we, through the high holidays, through the storytelling that we tell each other, pass on stories of being Jewish during the Hasidim, about modern life, Kabbalist, and so on, not always in the form of reading a book, but in the form of telling each other the stories that will pass on. A joke can be a story, an anecdote can be a story, the retelling of a dream can be a story, and of course, a novel and a short story and a poem and an essay. And the fact that we will continue to do it in a number of languages makes me incredibly proud. It is not knowing all those languages that makes me very excited. There's a lot of Jewish in the Jewish literature that I don't know, and I seek help through those translators and through other ways of storytelling in order to feel that empathy in that sense of continuity with others. That library will continue to mutate just as the diaspora has continued to mutate. Probably in 100 years, the sense of where we are will be very different. I don't know. I think Jews will remain. I don't know if America will be what it is today in 100 years. I don't know if there will be an America in 100 years. It's likely that a new Jewish diaspora will emerge, possibly in a place that we are really not suspecting right now. And as a result, that English will not be the language of main communication among Jews, but it will be something else, and a new literature will emerge. But it will find a way to connect with the English language Jewish literature that we have been producing over 150 years, the way we connect with the Ladino and with the Yiddish and with the Judo-Persian and Judo-Italian and others, and of course, with the Hebrew literature that we had in the past and that we have in the present as well. What makes Jewish literature Jewish? I guess the question mark, the inquisitiveness, the curiosity, the need to find an answer. A großen Dank, toda rabá, thank you, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a usted. Thank you so much, Ilan, for a fascinating talk that just makes me think of so many more questions, but I will just make one comment and ask one question, and then we will open it up to the audience. I'm sure there are many, many questions out there, and we want our listeners to be able to make their points. I'm very glad you talked about the work of the translator and how important the translator is. And I just wanted to note that when David Grossman, who you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, won the Booker Prize, the Booker International Prize for Horse Walks into a Bar in 2017, the monetary award that he received was equally divided between David and between Jessica Cohen, his translator, who has been to our distinguished lecture series, by the way.
Wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful woman. And so it is recognized that without the translator, there would be no book out there for the rest of the world.
Right.
So that was my comment about translation. And I'd like to ask you one question, and that is, do you think that, you mentioned Shylock. So aside from Shylock, do you think that negative characterizations of Jews reinforce stereotypes for those Jewish readers and the non-Jewish readers? And I was specifically thinking of Mordechai Richler's, Canadian writer Mordechai Richler's book, The Apprenticeship of Duty Kravitz, right, where Duty Kravitz he's arrogant, he's avaricious, he's dishonest, he's greedy. Does somebody who finishes a book like that with a negative portrait of a Jew think, well, so many of them are like that, or that is a picture of a Jew? What do you think about that?
Bonnie, I'm delighted that you're here, and I thank you, and I'm grateful for the two comments, the questions or statements that you have made. Let me very, very briefly just start in passing almost with the symmetrical connection between translators and authors. Only recently has there been a push to put even the name of the translator on the cover of the book or the title page of the book. It's long overdue. Think in Jewish history of cities like Toledo that have really been centers of translation. If it wasn't for the translators of Toledo, we would not have the Moreh Nebuchim, the Guide of the Perplexed. We would not have the Kuzari. We would not have so many books, not always translated into Jewish languages. They could have been translated into Latin or into Arabic, depending on that multilingual existence. And I want to here stress that throughout Jewish history, authors have also been translators, and translators of other people's works that they deem important to bring to their particular linguistic habitats, and sometimes self-translators, an aspect that I am particularly interested in, because since we are multilingual, it sometimes happens that we think, well, what's the most practical language that I can write this work in if I feel fully comfortable in 2 or 3 or 4 languages? And Sholem Aleichem translated his work from Hebrew into Yiddish. So did Abramovich. There are writers like Elie Wiesel that translated their works also from Yiddish into French, and later on, together with his wife, helping his wife into English. So it's important to think that the translators are crucial and as essential as the authors, but sometimes the author and the translator can be one, or sometimes the author can be a translator for some other author. And in the Jewish literary tradition, that is a very important role to play. Isaac Bashevis Singer, an author that I am finishing a biography of, will be published next year. He started as a translator. He translated mainly books from Polish, but those books were from the German, or from Emma Lazarus, the author of the famous sonnet that is engraved in the plaque in the Statue of Liberty of even the poor, you're poor, you're tired, your huddled masses yearning to be breathe free. Herself was a translator from the German of the Sephardic Spanish poets like Yehuda Levi, Shmuel Anagid, and so on. So she's a poet, but she's also a translator. About anti-Semitism and portraits of the second topic that you raised, I think those are, it would be unfair for me to say more important, but as important, those cartoonish or negative portraits are as important for us as any flattering. Literature, particularly the novel, and you know it very well, Bonnie, is where we play out who we are. We find out who we are. And Jewish self-hatred is a feature of Jewish life. Philip Roth, Henry Roth, a variety of authors have dealt into the Jewish self-hatred as a way to deal with their own discomfort, having not felt comfortable. I talked at the beginning about how uncomfortable I felt speaking Yiddish, or feeling part of the kind of insular Yiddish-speaking community that I just couldn't see myself in. Later on, I became very grateful of that community, but those feelings can be much more conflicted later on than they are for me right now. I want to call attention here, Bonnie, to one, to me, very important essay that really resonates with me, but it's fire, it's charged. It's an essay that Jean-Paul Sartre, not Jewish, the existentialist philosopher, published in the 1930s, and that in English, in French, it's called La Question Juive, but in English, it's called Anti-Semite and Jew. And the argument that Sartre makes is that just as anti-Semites need Jews to exist, Jews need anti-Semites to exist as well. If you think of it, it's a disgusting thought. We need our antagonist or our enemy to be who we are. But if you think deeper and peel out all sorts of layers of unpleasantness, those who confront us sometimes come from within us, fortify who we are, and allow us to get a sense of why we should continue to be who we are. And I think that though anti-Semitism was not as overt when I was growing up in Mexico in the 1960s and 70s, clearly as it was for my grandparents in Ukraine or in Poland, or for my great-grandparents, none of whom I met, and all of whom I have tried to imagine their lives, sometimes in a short story or in passing in an essay. I'm convinced that it was when I left the Jewish enclave and went to university that I was reminded, sometimes benignly, that I was Jewish, that fortified my Jewish sense of who I was. And I have navigated with that throughout life. That, again, maybe started as Jewish self-hatred, or some version of it. But it's the environment who resists you that makes you remember who we are. And we call ourselves, let's remember, let's not forget, not because it's only about the dangers of forgetting. There's no bigger danger in Jewish life than forgetting. But it is because ultimately forgetting makes us just like everybody else. And we don't want that. We want to be different. And what makes us different is that we remember in a particular way.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Thank you for those answers, Ilan.
You have to unmute, Ron.
No, Ron. Ron,
I think. Yes,
there we go. Yeah.
there you go.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. We have a question that gets into this issue a little bit, and it's about Heinrich Heine. So here is a case where there's a person who's not religious, was even baptized, but is still, can we still see him as a Jewish writer?
It would be very easy, and frankly, Ron and dear question friend, to agonize on who is and who isn't a Jew, and it's a question that prevails in our daily way of defining ourselves. Proust also did not think of himself as a Jew. The grandchildren of Moses Mendelssohn had converted to Christianity. If you have an open way of looking at Jewish history, I would put Heinrich Heine in that list. I think that Jewish sensibility remains there. Of course, I can see the counter argument saying, how far are you going to go to retain that Jewish sensibility as the great-great-great-grandchild still someone, well, not unless they wake up and find that they have some sort of connection, and we see it in the neck of the woods where the two of you are, the reawakening of crypto-Jews and the conversos and so on. And that proves that there is that lasting element. Coming out of the closet, reawakening is a feature of Jewish life in modern life that is consistent. We sometimes have left the tribe, and then the environment reminds us, and we come back and something happens and clicks, and our reminder will leave something to the next generation or to other readers. So I would say yes. And it was thanks to people like Emma Lazarus, who translated Henrik Heine to make him Jewish, that I would say confirms that he's part of the tribe. It's not only that Henrik Heine did not want to, but somebody like Emma Lazarus said, well, even if he doesn't want to, I'm bringing him in and letting others decide. And therein again, the question of who the reader is.
You know, the point that you bring up that is intriguing and very interesting is this thing of the continuity that goes generation past generation. And there is something that is passed on that we can't quite define.
Right.
And but we know it's there.
Yeah.
And that
part, Ron, is, if I want to bring it back to language, I think that we use language to say as much as we can say, but there's a lot that we can't say. It's the silences. And I think that what makes literature is not only the words that are on the page, but the silences in between those words, the empty space, the white that exists. And that speaks to Tom as well. It's very important. I think here of Ludwig Wittgenstein, who said once that the limits of my world are the limits of my language. And that which I cannot say doesn't exist, which doesn't mean that I can't imagine.
Yeah. So, well, there are many things to follow up there. Okay, we have a question, and I would like to honor Gloria and ask a question that she brings. Why do you think Sephardic authors from the 18th and 19th century didn't develop a coherent modern literary tradition like Yiddish?
Yeah, that is a question that is at the heart of my the investigation of Jewish literature. The first modern novel, not Jewish, but the first modern novel is considered to be Don Quixote, published in two parts, 1605 and 1615, of course, in Spain. I often laugh. I teach Don Quixote every other year. I think that is one of, going back to something Bonnie was asking, I frankly think Don Quixote is one of the most anti-Spanish novels ever written. It's a savage critique of Spain in the 17th century. And yet it's the Spanish novel, and the characters are archetypes, stereotypes, prototypes of the Spanish character. What makes it modern is the fact that vis-a-vis biblical characters or medieval characters, Don Quixote changes internally. He starts in one place and he ends in another place internally. And that is modern literature, the capacity for a character to have an interior life and to change, to be affected. And that's what attracts us about those modern characters. I don't know the answer. I have speculated in a number of different places, all sorts of responses to this. Given that Spain was the birthplace of the modern novel, why didn't it also become the birthplace of the first Jewish novel? The first Jewish novels really will not appear until about a century later, more or less. And of course, by 1605, Jews were no longer in Spain. They had been out for a century plus. So this discovery of Cervantes is one that kind of comes across or materializes about a century later. But still, it's very interesting to think that there are really no great Ladino written novels. there are many Latino-speaking authors that wrote in other languages, Elias Canetti, Alfred Yoshua, etc.,
Mhm.
but not in Latino and not for Latino readers. Whereas in Yiddish, that happened almost since the very beginning. The novel existed there. I don't want to take too much time. I have lots of partial answers, but none that fully satisfy me either.
Another question that is come up, it's about the issue of the universal appeal in language and the avoiding of ethnic parochialism.
Right.
And the problem with issues like feminist literature or African-American literature or whatever. And Philip Roth, who wanted
Sure.
to identify as an American writer.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you deal with that then?
Sure.
Yeah.
Philip Roth is the perfect example, Ron and dear question maker. His early collection of short stories, Goodbye Columbus, which he wrote in the he published in the late 50s, was considered to be too controversial and unwelcomed by rabbis and other members of the Jewish community who almost really established a fatwa, meaning like the Ayatollah Khomeini, saying you should not read this book because it's not good for the Jews. The question is always, is this good for the Jews? And if it's not good for the Jews, should we put it under the table in order not to spread the word? But, something happens, Ron, when we stop writing in a minority language. When you write in a minority language, you can say as many nasty things as you want about the Jews, but only the Jews are going to be reading it. So, look, Tevier is a bit of a schmaltzy character. He's also a little bit of a stereotype. He's an incredible character, but only Jews are reading it, and likewise other Yiddish language characters. What happens when you write in a universal language, in a language where everybody can read, is that your reader has changed. The paradigm has shifted. And now you're writing for anybody and everybody. And whereas there are many moments in Philip Roth's literary quest where the characters are frankly very unpleasant as Jewish characters, it's part of what being Jewish American means. There are many characters of a Bashevis Zinker that are also unpleasant. And they are written in Yiddish, but then immediately translated into English. So I think that what makes Jewish literature extraordinarily rich is the difficult fight against parochialism. That means that literature creates discomfort. I think that if a book doesn't create discomfort, frankly, I don't know if that book has enormous value. I think that a book that is only read in order to escape, this is my way of being a reader, is a book that likely is not going to last. A book that creates discomfort, that pushes you to think differently, maybe stresses some parts of yourself that you don't like, is a book that matters. And to be a Jewish writer requires courage in that sense. And some Jewish writers, like Isaac Babel and other Russian writers, ended up being shot by Stalin or in the dungeons or in the Gulag. Others suffered a worse fate, if there is such a worse fate. That is, they were not met by their contemporaries. For worse than ending up in jail is the act of censoring by establishing that you don't read. But of course, we also know that one of the great incentives to make people read is that controversy around censorship. If a book feels hot, as is happening in Texas right now, we're saying don't read these books in high school. Well, I'm convinced that young, intelligent Texans are going to go and find those books. It's a wonderful publicity for those books. Readers are always very intelligent, always, sometimes more intelligent than they are.
Okay, one last question. You live in the hometown with the Yiddish Book Center. What is that like?
That is an enormous, inexhaustible form of joy. The reason why I'm here is not Amherst College, is not the beauty of this landscape I'm looking out the window. It's not Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost and Richard Wilbur and David Foster Wallace. It is really, to a larger extent, the Yiddish Book Center. And when I was offered a job, I thought this was a matana from Himmel, a gift from heaven. The fact that there is a depository of Yiddish books 2 miles away from my home, that I collaborate with them and that they have been opened to me to see other forms of Yiddish from Latin America, for instance, that is not often contemplated, it brings life to the way I see and think. I think that my sorting out what Yiddish means to me has in large part been thanks to the Yiddish, to the center, to the Yiddish Book Center. And of course, everything now is online, which you could say, well, you don't have to live there. You could live in Texas, where they are censoring books and just access the Yiddish Book Center. But there's something about the proximity and the fact that all these people make a pilgrimage, just as people go to see the tomb of Maimonides or of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav or of Schneerson. People come in this pilgrimage to go to the Yiddish Book Center, and I feel part of that. It has propelled my own writing and my own thinking and my own creativity in ways that I would not have, I can't imagine otherwise. So it's a real joy.
Mm. Ilan, Professor Stavans.
Ilan.
Thank you so much for being here with us today in the Santa Fe Distinguished Lecture Series. And already in the comments, there are so many laudatory comments thanking you today for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, the community of readers, wherever you are, for connecting and for keeping the word at the center. And thank you, Ron, and the committee that you have around for using this technology, very Jewish technology, to erase time and to erase place and to make us all coincide on this territory that is the screen. I very much appreciate it.